much for joining me here today at Re-Written Vintage Homestead. We haven't done an American history video in quite a while, so with everything that's going on in the news right now, I thought it would be an appropriate time. If you're like me, and I believe that the majority of the United States is like me right now, you're enthralled in the kidnapping of Savannah Guthrie's mom, Nancy, who's 84, I believe, from Arizona. Now, Savannah Guthrie is on a TV show in the mornings. So she is fairly well known if you watch that TV show, the Today Show. If you don't watch it, you didn't know who she was. She was involved in some of the presidential debates, and she's had some big interviews. You would know a person like that has quite a bit of money, but she's not the magnitude of a star or someone in industry, or that you would think she had just millions upon millions upon millions of dollars. That's what makes it kind of odd. And a lot of people didn't even know who she was until this kidnapping. So it's been about 25 days, and her mom was, according to the sheriff, forcibly taken from her home. There's blood on the porch. They have released video cam images of a person dressed, covered head to toe, messing with her Nest Box camera. They've showed that it's been torn off in the back. There have been things leaked that there were other cameras that were torn off. They have found gloves. They found a backpack. They have gotten ransom demands for cryptocurrency. I think the family is now offering like $1 million for the return, either alive or passed away, of Miss Guthrie. So it made me wonder about other kidnappings in American history, if there was anything we could learn from them. Anything that we could apply to this case, anything that might be helpful, or things that were done in the past that are making things helpful here in this case. And so I thought we'd give it a bit of a deep dive. It might be a little longer than usual, so I hope you'll hang in there with me. And let's see what we can find out. The very first recorded kidnapping in the United States for ransom was Charlie, his name was Charles, they called him Charlie Ross. He was born in 1870 and he disappeared July 1st, 1874. The saying, don't take candy from strangers, came from this case. You'll find out why. It happened over 150 years ago. And on July 1st, 1874, 4-year-old Charlie Ross and his 5-year-old brother, Walter Ross, were playing in the front yard of their family's home in Germantown, a well-to-do section of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Back then, kids played outside, unsupervised. Mom probably looked out the window every now and then. You didn't have the fears that we have today about letting your kids go outside and play. A horse-drawn carriage pulled up to the residence, and the boys were approached by 2 men who offered candy and fireworks if they would go for a ride with them. These 2 men were known to the boys as they had been visiting with candy in the days preceding July the 1st. So we have some grooming going on here. Some neighbors had testified they'd seen the same men pulled up to the curb talking to the boys several days preceding this. And each time they were given the children candy. As a matter of fact, one of the boys ran in the house one time and showed his dad the candy. And his dad said, well, who gave it to you? I don't know, just some 2 nice guys, And so his dad thought, well, it just must be 2 men who really like children. Well, they convinced the boys to get into the carriage with them. And they were taken through Philadelphia to a store where Walter was directed to buy fireworks and given 25 cents. So they had coerced the boys by saying, the 4th of July is a couple days away. How about you guys get in? We'll go get some candy. We'll go get some fireworks. We'll have a big time. So the older brother goes in to get the fireworks, get the candy. He comes outside and they're gone. They're gone. He is scared to death. He's just, what, is he 6? Yeah, he's 6. So he's crying and screaming his head off and, lost and scared. So some bystanders, come up to him and ask him what's the matter. He tells them. One very nice gentleman took him home. Now Dad really was worried. After Walter, who was the older boy, was returned home, the boy's father, Christian Ross, received the first of 23 ransom letters from kidnappers demanding $20,000 for Charlie's release. The notes warned them against police intervention and threatened Charlie's life if Christian did not cooperate. The kidnappers had assumed that Charlie's family was wealthy because they lived in a very large house, and the father owned a small dry goods store. But the truth was the family was heavily in debt due to the stock market crash of 1873. Seeing no way to pay the ransom, Christian went to the police, and the kidnapping soon became national news. Can you imagine the terror, the absolute terror? Your little boy is missing. Now, you can go to the National Archives and you can read about this case. It is so heart-wrenching. And little Walter actually got on the stand and testified. And he said that his little brother at first was very excited because he thought he was going to get some candy and fireworks. But apparently the men in the carriage didn't go the right way. And he knew the way to the store, and they were going a different way. Walter here, they had sit on one of the men's knees, and they put Charlie in between them. And I think after a while, Charlie started getting scared and crying because Walter testified to that. And one of the men told him to just settle down. They were going to go get candy. So they started catching on something was wrong, and they probably shouldn't have gone. It's just heart-wrenching. Later that December, 2 criminals, Joseph Douglas and William Mosher, were shot during a botched burglary in Brooklyn, New York. Mosher was killed instantly, but as Douglas lay dying, he confessed that the pair had been responsible for stealing Charlie Ross. Now, up until this point, they had no leads. They had, a couple neighbors saying, we did see men over here. They would describe the horse. They would describe the carriage. They didn't know the men. Something that was interesting when Walter testified, the older boy, he said one of the men had a real funny nose. It looked like a pig. It was kind of pushed up. He gave them their hair color. He gave them really a very good description. But up until this point, there were really no leads. So here they are. They're in a botched burglary. One of them is dead. The other one's dying. The other one says, I have something to tell you, but I'm not going to tell you if he's not dead because he has a family and I don't want to hurt the family. So they literally drag him over to him so he can see that he's dead, hoping he'll tell whatever it is he wants to tell. And he lets them know that they were the ones who took the little boy. But he said, I can't help you finding him because he was the only one who knew where he was. I don't know where he was. So that was very sad. They were thinking they were finally going to get him. This was very sad. 2 hours later, Douglas died as well. Later, Mosher's brother-in-law, William Westervelt, was identified as having a part in Charlie Ross's case. Although he wasn't convicted of participating in the kidnapping, he was charged with conspiracy and sentenced to 6 years in prison. So you might want to, this is interesting too, if you want to, you can find testimony of that trial. Read along with it. Now, what brought his attention was he was always seen with these 2 guys. Wherever these 2 guys were, he was. And the police actually started thinking, he is the one that was moving Charlie Ross around. And he did testify that at the time these 2 men were killed, Charlie Ross was still alive. Now, how did he know that? So he was involved. And if you read the testimony at the National Archives, it's almost like a William Shakespeare play or something, the way they talk. They have a lot of broken English. You can definitely tell the difference between those who have and those who have not. So very interesting. But because of the abduction of Charlie Ross, Pennsylvania became the first state to pass a law changing kidnapping from a misdemeanor into a felony. The Charlie Project, have you heard of that? That is a database of cold cases of people who are missing that you can go to, look up people, look by state, and look at cold cases. And they're there to hopefully, bring something up to mind that you may know something to help find these people. That was named after little Charlie Ross. Little Charlie Ross was never found, and his parents never gave up hope. And when public interest started waning in the case, his dad wrote a story about it, with a timeline and maybe some information that the public didn't know. And of course, it became a bestseller, and he took that money and put it right back into investigation. They lost a lot of money trying to find that little boy, and he never was found. So it is very, very sad. I've done a previous deep dive into this next kidnapping, and I'll include it up here if you want to learn more about it. But the second most famous kidnapping in the United States was the Lindbergh baby. Charles Augustus Lindbergh was 20 months old. He was the son of famous aviator, Charles Lindbergh, and his wife, Anne Morrow Lindbergh. Now, he was the golden boy. Charles Lindbergh was the golden boy of the United States. Good looking aviator. He'd done things in aviation no one had up until that point. So this was like not only an offense against him, it was an offense against the United States. And people were not going to take it lightly. Charles Jr. was kidnapped on March 1st, 1932 from his nursery on the second floor of the Lindbergh home in New Jersey. The child's absence was discovered and reported to his parents by his nanny, and his parents were home. The parents and the nanny were all home during the time of this kidnapping. A search of the premises was immediately made, and a ransom note demanding $50,000 was found on the nursery windowsill. After the Hopewell police were notified, the report was telephoned to the New Jersey State Police, who took charge of the investigation. And during the search at the kidnapping scene, traces of mud were found on the floor of the nursery. 2 sections of a ladder had been used in reaching the window. One of the 2 sections was split or broken where it joined the other, indicating that the ladder had broken during the ascent or descent. There were no blood stains in or around the nursery, nor were there any fingerprints. Okay, so here's one of the things we learned from the Lindbergh case. You have to wear gloves when you're dealing with evidence. Now, they had this ladder. This ladder is broken. This ladder was handmade. You could tell. It wasn't factory made. It's handmade. And these investigators are messing with it. They could not get fingerprints off of it at all because every one of them had touched it. Any kind of evidence, the windowsill, the baby's crib, everything had fingerprints all over it. So because of this case, investigators learned to wear gloves when dealing with evidence. Okay, a second ransom note was received by Colonel Lindbergh on March the 6th, increasing the ransom demand to $70,000. A third ransom note was received by Colonel Lindbergh's attorney on March the 8th. Now, see that in the first case of the baby and in the second case of the Lindberghs, the kidnappers get a hold of the family directly. They don't go to the media. They go directly to them. This is interesting because in the Guthrie case, they never have contacted the family directly or the family's attorneys. They've gone right to television stations and entertainment platforms with ransom demands. Very unusual. Now, on March the 8th, Dr. John Condon, who was a retired school principal, published in the paper that he would be happy to act as a go-between between the kidnappers and the Lindberghs, and he would also throw in $1,000 ransom. When a fourth ransom letter came, it said, "We accept those conditions," and Charles Lindbergh accepted those conditions as well. About March the 10th, Dr. Condon received $70,000 in cash as ransom and immediately started negotiations for payment through the newspaper columns. So they start talking to the kidnappers. The kidnappers then reply, all in the newspaper. But it isn't anywhere where you and I can go find it. It's in the classified somewhere. It's all code words that only they can understand. But that's how they're communicating back and forth with each other. On March the 12th, after receiving an anonymous telephone call, Dr. Condon received the fifth ransom note. This message stated that another note would be found under a stone, and they gave him directions as to where the stone was. This sixth note gave instructions where to meet a man. So Dr. Condon went to the Woodlawn Cemetery, and there he met someone who called himself John. Now, they discussed payment for ransom. Dr. Condon said, "We will not pay ransom unless we see proof that you have him." Now, this stranger named John had a very particular accent. Now, Mr. Condon thought it was Scandinavian, something like that, when it was actually German, but a very pronounced accent. Also, very pronounced nose. So he had facial features that would easily be recognized again. The stranger agreed to furnish a token of the child's identity, and they sent the baby's sleeping items and a seventh ransom note to Dr. Condon on March 16th. So they provided proof. Now, see, the Guthries have said, "Send us proof. Send us proof, and we'll happily pay." And these kidnappers have never sent anything, nothing. Now, whether Nancy Guthrie is alive or dead, let's say she has passed. If you were an evil kidnapper, wouldn't you still send some item so they knew it was you and they would pay that ransom? They've done nothing. So it's like they don't even care about the money at this point. All in all, the Lindberghs received 13 ransom notes. Dr. Condon met again with John and paid a previously agreed amount of $50,000. I don't know why that went down $20,000. I couldn't find information on that, but it did. At that time, he was given written instructions on where to find the baby. However, they did go. It was an elaborate ruse, and there was no baby there. There was no signal there on how to find the baby. But on May the 12th, 1932, the body of the kidnapped baby was accidentally found, partially buried, badly decomposed, about 4.5 miles from the Lindbergh home. The baby's head was crushed. The Lindberghs positively identified the baby, and he was cremated. And the coroner listed the cause of death as blunt force trauma to the head. Said that the baby had died about 2 months prior. Now, the kidnapping took place 2 months prior. And what a lot of theories says is, the ladder was broken in half. And they believe that as the kidnapper was coming down, it was a very tall house. As the kidnapper was coming down the stairs, he fell with the baby. The baby hit his head and passed away. The kidnapper discarded the baby several miles away. Starting in 1934, 2 years after the abduction of baby Lindbergh, money started circulating. Now, this is the first time in American history that money is marked. The police, the FBI, whoever was working on this case, wrote down the serial numbers of every bit of money that they gave to this kidnapper, John. Then they notified banks, they notified stores, they notified gas stations, they notified everyone. These are the serial numbers that we're looking for. If you get any of these, please let us know. Well, 2 years after the Lindbergh kidnapping, this money started circulating around. In 1934, marked money had been discovered by a bank teller. And this bank teller was like, he didn't find it because of the serial number. He found it because it had a person's name and their license plate number and their phone number on it. Then he checked it and found the serial number. And whoa. They found out after tracing it that it had come to the bank from a gas station. The gas station attendant said he was a little suspicious of the man who had come in to buy gas. He was acting very strange. I don't know. There was just something about him that put his antennas up. So he recorded he watched the man leave, wrote down the make of his car, wrote down his license plate number, everything he could think of on that bill, and gave it to the bank. It was at that time they were able to figure out who this was. They were able to identify him after he had deposited that money into the bank, after the gas station had deposited that money into the bank, and they began surveilling this person. Now, this money began circulating all over the place. And so what the FBI and the police did was they had maps. And every time someone would report they had received some of that money, they would put a red dot on the map. Okay, so they began to be able to narrow it down to a certain area. And it just so happened that the area is where this suspect lived. So they finally made their move. So the license number, they tracked that. It was issued to Bruno Richard Hauptmann from New York, Bronx. He admitted that several other purchases had been made with ransom money. So yeah, he admitted he had ransom money. He was positively ID'd by Dr. Condon and the taxi driver. There was a taxi driver who had been given a note and told to give it to the Lindberghs, and he identified Hauptmann too. And Dr. Condon said, he's John. That's the man I met. More than $13,000 in marked money was found in his garage. Dr. Condon's telephone number and address were found scrawled on a door frame inside a closet. Handwriting on the ransom notes matched samples of Hauptmann's writing. Hauptmann was found guilty of kidnapping, extortion, and murder, and he was electrocuted in 1936. Now, what came out of this case, other than just being a heartbreak for the American people and the Lindbergh family? It was the first kidnapping case in the United States to use marked bills. I don't know who thought it up. It was genius, okay? Secondly, it was the first kidnapping in the United States where they used forensics. They used wood forensics in this case. Tool marks on a ladder matched tools owned by Hauptmann. Experts from the United States Department of Agriculture examined the wood used in the making of the ladder, the nails, and the age of the wood. Wood in the ladder was found to match wood using his flooring in his attic. There was also a board missing from his attic that matched the wood that the ladder was made. The development of the Lindbergh Law came out of this kidnapping. The case highlighted the need for federal involvement in kidnapping, leading to the enactment of this federal statute in 1932. This law enables the FBI to intervene if the victim is not returned within 24 hours. I wish this law did not have the 24-hour limitation put on it. Let's talk about the Guthrie case. She's reported missing. Blood on the porch, right? The sheriff's office come, they investigate. They do their investigation, they rope the place off. Within 24 hours, the rope's gone. They say their investigation there is done. Reporters, neighbors, anybody who wants to go to that crime scene and check it out is walking all over the damn place. You know, walking up to the blood to look at it, looking in the bushes. There have been people showing up there with shovels, you know. So the FBI finally is able to step in and they re-rope it off. It's been roped off ever since. But the way I see it is when they do finally catch someone, and they will. When they do finally catch someone, this person has an excellent defense. You know, things have been tampered with. Things have been contaminated. This was placed there by somebody else because of the sheriff's office not blocking the place off. They're just not equipped for these kinds of investigations. The FBI, I wish, could be brought in a lot quicker, but they're not unless they're asked to by the police or the sheriff's department there. I'm glad this came out of the Lindbergh case, but I wish there was not a 24-hour wait period. Such a sad, sad thing. And, you know, the Lindberghs, they ended up, they stayed married the remainder of their lives, but Charles Lindbergh's reputation after that, you know, just got soiled and soiled. You know, the community, at first, they're all with you, and they feel terrible for you, and then they start trying to find out what you did to cause this. You know, all of our crime sleuths like me. What could you have done to bring this onto yourself? And they started finding more and more and more and more unfavorable things about Charles Lindbergh. And the man was an absolute genius, but his reputation was tarnished in the end. You know, one other comparison I want to make from the Lindbergh case to the Guthrie case is that in the Lindbergh case, all correspondence was done in code words. They didn't have the technology we have now, right? But they even had the wherewithal to keep things on the down low. They were not giving information out to the public. They were keeping things quiet. They did not want to upset these kidnappers. They wanted to try to get the baby back, right? Now, in the case of the Guthries, for example, the sheriff is on TV saying, you know, something else we might do is tomorrow, I think we're going to use drones very low to the ground, because even if Miss Guthrie is unalived, her pacemaker will still be emitting signals. And we might be able to connect that to our drone and locate her body. So in other words, he just told the kidnappers, if she is unalived and you've buried her somewhere, you better go get the pacemaker, right? There are some things we don't need to know. We do not need to know absolutely everything. We love to know because we're trying to figure it out ourselves. But we don't need to know, and I'm fine with that. But it's so important to keep a lot of things on the down low. Now, this next case absolutely freaked me out. It was during my lifetime. I was probably 12 or 13 years old, and I was scared. You know, this was on the news, like 24 hours a day. Now, we have to remember this was in the 60s. This is when the Vietnam War was on TV every night at dinner time. It was a time of hippies. It was a time of drug use and free love. It was a time of Watergate. So many things were going on. Black power. Radicalization in college campuses. Protest. All of these things led to the formation of the Symbionese Liberation Army. SLA. So that's going to bring us to Patty Hearst. Except for the Lindbergh baby kidnapping, no other case has inspired as much media attention as the abduction of Patty Hearst. And this went on. And I mean, this was huge news, huge news. I think the Nancy Guthrie case, other than on social media, you don't see it on the news as much as we were. It is waning. And I don't blame the Guthries for increasing that ransom to keep it in the news. Patty was the granddaughter of newspaper tycoon William Randolph Hearst. She was 19 when she was kidnapped at University of California, Berkeley, by the militant revolutionary group, the Symbionese Liberation Army, SLA, in 1974. Now, Patty had been living with a young man at that time who was also going to college. When she was kidnapped, her kidnappers beat the living tar out of him and tied him up, and out they went. When they first held Patty, she was kept in a closet for many, many months. She was raped, sexually assaulted. She was not treated well during that time. Eventually, she was let out. While held by the SLA, Hearst was indoctrinated into their radical ideology, eventually adopting it as her own in taped messages to the media. She renamed herself Tanya and was seen taking part in a bank robbery in San Francisco, as well as a shootout at a sporting goods store in Los Angeles. The only ransom that was ever requested was $2 million worth of food to be distributed to the poor, which was later increased to $6 million. Well, at first her dad said, I can't do $6 million. I don't have $6 million. I can do the $2 million, but I don't even know how we're going to do that, really. But he did. He created some kind of way to do that. 3 or 4 different occasions. The first one was a damn riot, handing out food. They perfected it a bit so that it wouldn't get so chaotic and out of hand. And I believe they had food distributions 2 or 3 times after that. She was never released. No ransom for her return was ever given. And in the meantime, she's sending taped messages to the radio station at Berkeley, UC Berkeley, saying, I am now a part of this cause. My name is Tanya. We want equality for all people. We want the poor taken care of. You know, we hate pigs. You know, just the whole hippie genre thing. So in September 1975, the FBI finally captured Hearst. When being interviewed by the FBI and asked her occupation, she stated she was an urban guerrilla. I remember when they were taking her, they had her in the police car on her way, and she's giving the peace sign and just happy, smiling, everything. But later, she denied joining the revolutionaries and maintained that she was drugged and coerced. Nevertheless, she was found guilty of participating in the bank robbery and sentenced to 7 years in prison. Now, quite a few of the members of the SLA had died. The FBI found them. House caught on fire. Big shootout. They were all killed. There was another couple. Their name was Harris. Was it William and Bill? And I can't remember the other one. His wife. They had met in college. They became radicalized. Patty was running around with them. They had given her a safe haven. And they went in to rob a store. While they were in there, things didn't go well. And Patty's out in the car and she starts shooting at the door of the store so they can get out another way. They were arrested at the time. Patty was arrested as well. I believe a person was killed there at that time. After just 22 months behind bars, her sentence was commuted by President Jimmy Carter in 1979. Why? Because money pays. More than 2 decades later, President Bill Clinton pardoned her completely in 2001. The kidnapping of Patty Hearst provided major insights into psychological coercion, the Stockholm Syndrome, and the complexities of criminal liability under extreme duress. It highlighted how captives can develop affinity for their captors. It forced legal debates on brainwashing versus free will and demonstrated the impact of media in radicalizing political narratives. That is really interesting, right? The role the media plays in fueling divisiveness and tension. I think we've seen that a lot in the assassination attempts on President Trump, right? As far as Patty Hearst, I can't imagine the fear the poor girl felt when she was taken. I remember seeing her smile and give the peace sign, and she was so radical and this and that. But, at what point do you do what you think you're expected to do just to stay alive? Now, she could have stopped that the minute she was rescued, but how long does that take place? You have to be kind of desensitized to that. So it's a very interesting case. But what came out of that is we learned the role the media plays, which is interesting. So let's compare this to the Guthrie case. So not too long before Nancy Guthrie was kidnapped, her daughter Savannah did a episode on the Today Show. I'm going home, and I'm taking you all with me, and I'm going to show you my mom, and show you where we go to eat, and show you where I grew up, and show you where, like a homecoming. Did she show too much? Did she bring this out into the open? Her mom was photographed wearing an Apple Watch. In one of the ransom notes, they mentioned the Apple Watch. And of course, at first, everybody's like, oh, they really do have her because they mentioned that. Well, it was right there in the video. They could see it. So the media Savannah Guthrie could have played a part in this by revealing too much. But like I said, until you have a case like this, you really don't think of things like that. So, that's something that we've learned from now and probably won't be duplicated in the future. So those are 3 famous cases in the United States that brought about a lot of change in the way they're investigated, what they try to figure out about the person who's been abducted and the abductees. But there have been hundreds and hundreds of kidnappings in the United States other than these 3. What we're finding, though, and if you do your own research, what I found is that the majority of them are children. They're not adults. They're children, and they aren't taken for ransom. They're taken for other bad reasons, okay? Not so much adults. And something else I found, too, is that since 2025, this blew me away. I never even heard about this. You may have. I didn't even hear about this. But there are 2 brothers that are now being held for kidnapping a family in Minnesota and demanding cryptocurrency. This is the first time I've heard of that happening. So the U.S. Attorney's Office announced in 2025 it filed kidnapping charges against 23-year-old Raymond Christian Garcia and his 24-year-old brother, Isaiah Angelo Garcia. Federal prosecutors say the brothers engaged in a kidnapping and cryptocurrency heist where they held 3 members of a Minnesota family at gunpoint for more than 9 hours and eventually stole $8 million in crypto assets. Now, from what they've been saying in the Guthrie case, once that money, crypto money, is put into someone's crypto wallet, it's gone. You can't trace it. You can't find it. I also did find that in the case of Charlie Ross, in the case of the Lindbergh baby, in the case of Patty Hearst, all 3 of those cases, FBI, police were saying, don't pay the ransom. If you pay the ransom, this is going to be happening all the time. Don't do it. Let us investigate first and see if we can find these people. But you can see how eventually desperation takes over and you're going to be like, oh no, I'm going to pay that money if it'll get my loved one back. Savannah Guthrie got a lot of slack for it. How come you didn't offer $1 million to begin with? You know, well, she was probably being advised not to pay anything. Don't pay anything. Let us investigate first and see if we can find these people. Charlie Ross's dad sent a letter to the kidnappers and said, I'm not paying you a dime. I am not going to pay you a dime for doing something as harmful and illegal as this. You know, he had a change of heart. But that's been the consensus usually, don't pay. But then desperation takes over. The incident began the morning of September 8th when a resident of the community of Grant, Minnesota walked out of his home to take out the garbage. 2 men armed with AR-15 style rifles approached the man and forced the man back inside his home at gunpoint, taking the man's wife and son hostage as well. Could that have been something that happened in the Guthrie case? Now, we have not heard if there was a forced entry, right? We've heard the doorbells were ripped. Yeah, I mean, the door cameras were ripped and messed with and that kind of thing. At one point, we heard the back door was open, and no, the back door wasn't open. You know, it was forced open. No, it wasn't forced open. It was just open. You know, you're like, what the heck? What, was there forced entry or not? And like I said, we don't know. We don't know everything, right? But could it be that they blocked that camera and then she came to the door? And it was at that time she was at the door that an attack took place. Just wondering if they caught her off guard. The victims had their hands zip tied and were forced to lie on the floor. Investigators say that while Raymond Garcia held the wife and the son at gunpoint, Isaiah Garcia forced the man to log into his crypto account and transfer an amount of cryptocurrency wallet that the Garcias provided to a wallet that they provided. While this was happening, the victims say the brothers were making frequent phone calls to a third party who appeared to be providing them account information. And this person told them, they've got more. They've got more, and I know they have more. So the Garcia brothers started demanding more, and they were told by the man that that information was on a hard drive at the family's cabin, which was approximately 3 hours away. So they forced the man, or one of the men did, forced the man to drive to the cabin, pointing a shotgun at him to retrieve the additional cryptocurrency. While he was gone, the other man got distracted somehow, and someone in the house was able to call 911, and, you know, these people were saved. Thank goodness. So what we've learned from this case is targeting. Criminals often target individuals based on publicly available information or data breaches. This was a very well-to-do family in that community. Now, FBI police aren't releasing their name. This is the first time I'd heard of this and the cryptocurrency thing, which made me wonder, the people that did this, did they know about this case and say, we could do it even better, but cryptocurrency is the way to go? Because once that money is put in there, it can't be traced. So let's talk about why the Guthrie case is so weird compared to these other ones. Well, she's an 83, 84-year-old woman, and that hardly ever happens. Why would you take an elderly person? Other than it would be an easy target, I suppose. They had to have known that she lived by herself. They had to know her comings and goings. It looks like they scoped her house previously. But it's just odd. It's odd to take a person at that age. Like I've said several times, Savannah Guthrie is a celebrity. She's no huge star that's going to have an unlimited amount of money. So it's to me, it's almost like a local thing. Local people who know the family, local people who talk about how much money they might have, more of a local thing than a national thing. We've not heard if the demands for ransom were real. The problem is they never provided proof of life or that ransom would have been paid. They're still offering, the Guthries are still offering a ransom, so it's not been paid. So they've received no proof of life, which makes me think that these demands are all fake. They're all bad actors who decided to jump in there. They were asked for money, then it was increased, then they were saying they were a friend of the kidnappers and, to keep them from killing her, if, they would tell where she was, if they would pay for, none of these people ever provided proof. And it's like I said before, even if she was unalived, if they really wanted money, they would have sent some type of proof to get that money. So in my opinion, this is local, right? These are people that know this family, know pretty well what the family has. It's easy to track the comings and the goings of this family. Savannah's sister also lives there too. I don't think it was for ransom. If it was for ransom, they would have been paid the ransom by now. I feel it was more of well, let me tell you what this reminds me of. This reminds me of like a mafia hit. They don't want anything out of it. They're just getting that person and that's it. It was like they were instructed to do so by somebody else and paid off by somebody else. They don't need the money from the ransom. They're getting it from another source. That's how I feel. To me, it is like that. It's like there was a vendetta. I don't know who the vendetta is with. If it's with the mom, Nancy Guthrie, or if it's with Savannah Guthrie, or her other daughter, or her other son. We have no idea why she was targeted, but that's how it feels to me. It feels to me like if it's more of a vendetta thing. The money is going to be paid to these people elsewhere. They don't need the ransom. They don't need the possibility of being tracked by sending ransom demands. That's how I feel. That's how I feel it's different than some of these other cases. So it's so sad. I cannot imagine what that family is going through. And I hope it is resolved very quickly. I hope that sheriff keeps things on the down low now to himself. I hope the FBI has stepped in and, it's taken a long time, but you have to make sure you have all your P's and Q's and everything in a row so that when the time comes to prosecute, there isn't a problem. I hope you guys learned something here too, as well, with these cases that have happened throughout American history, these very sad cases. And, but out of these sad cases, good things have happened as far as investigations. And they're interesting too. Part of American history. So thanks for watching, you guys. Like, subscribe, and share. Leave your comments below. Let me know what you think. I really love to hear from you guys. And when you hit that like button, it gets my videos out and I really, really appreciate it. And I'll see you in a couple days.